This is Jimmy.
And Scott.
And this is the Lead Domino podcast powered by MDP Lacrosse. On this podcast, we will be discussing with athletes, coaches, and other professionals what specific mental techniques they utilize to prepare, compete, and recover. These are the questions that fascinate us, and we want to hear what our guests do to be their best mentally. And hopefully, you get a little something out of these episodes to help move you forward. On today's episode, we host Marcus DiBernardo. Marcus is a native of Middlefield, Connecticut, and focused mainly on baseball and basketball until his father introduced soccer to the community. Marcus excelled at soccer and earned his way to Division I Central Connecticut State University. He is currently the head men's soccer coach at Monroe College in New Rochelle, New York. In 2019, Marcus's men's soccer team secured the program's first ever NJCAA Division I National Championship. In 2018, Marcus won an NJCAA Division I National Championship as head coach of the Monroe women's soccer team, while also leading the men to a tournament semifinal in the same season. It's crazy. Marcus is a three-time National Coach of the Year, 2012, 2018, and 2019. Our conversation touches on many topics regarding coaching, teaching, and learning. The common denominator, no matter what sports you're involved in, is how the human brain functions. Marcus shares his story, his philosophies, and advice. There's so much information packed into this episode, it's definitely going to have to be listened to multiple times. What makes a great athlete great? Is it talent? Is it environment? Is it the drill, or is it how you execute the drill? We dive into all of it and get incredible insights from an incredible mind. Follow Marcus on Instagram at Marcus DiBernardo and subscribe to his YouTube channel, Marcus DiBernardo. Marcus also offers a cognitive soccer course and senior and youth diploma courses at his website, DiBernardoSoccerSchool.com. We're very lucky to have Marcus on today and just get a little taste of how he operates. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope you take something from this episode and share it with somebody who can use it. Enjoy. Marcus DiBernardo, welcome to the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Glad you can make some time. But really, we want to talk about some mental skills, mental techniques, different things you do in your everyday life. And I think it's best if we just get started. We jump right into it. You can start with giving us your background, where you're from, where you've been, where you're going, and everything in between.
All right. I don't know if I can do the where we're going yet. You never know.
That is a good point.
So my background in the game is, it was really a baseball and basketball town that I grew up in. And then my dad, at a very young age, kind of introduced soccer to the town. He started the first league, and from there, nice. I was kind of hooked.
Yeah.
And,
where'd you grow up, Marcus?
And I grew up in Middlefield, Connecticut.
Oh, cool.
Halfway in between Hartford and New Haven.
Okay.
So I got introduced to the game from my dad, and then played throughout and went to the local college, Central Connecticut State, and even during my time in college, because my dad started that league, I really had a passion for coaching. And I coached, I think it was a U16 girls team with him, and I also coached a really good team, a U16 boys team from South Central with a pretty famous guy, Chico Chicoran, who was an old U.S. national team player.
Okay.
When I was still in college, I was actually coaching that team. So
wow.
I had a really early start into my coaching career.
Yeah.
And I never looked back from there. And I probably coached at Platte High School, Valley Regional High School, club ball all over the place in Connecticut. I coached Truman High School in the Bronx, Brandeis High School. I was the assistant at Martin Luther King High School. I started the first U23 FC Harlem team.
Wow.
I was on the board at South Bronx United when they were just first starting. So I was involved in the game a lot. I was at Central Connecticut State where I played. I was also a coach for them for a couple of years at Central Connecticut State, and also spent 12 years now in the NJCAA in the college game there as a head coach at Monroe College in New Rochelle.
Cool.
So I've been,
So you got it's a true coach's story, a true coach's journey. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that, the environments, been in so many different environments, because I started off, as an educator, and I taught pre-K through 12th grade, which is, again, until you actually till you actually teach pre-K and elementary school is a completely different skill set than teaching, say, junior high through high school.
Sure.
And I was a phys ed teacher with a coaching minor, and so when it comes to coaching, like, you realize that, when you're going to do the U8 program or U6s in a town, it's far, far different. And I think that there's a benefit to coaching all the levels. It makes you more aware. It makes you a better teacher of the game. It makes you understand kind of the fundamentals of the game a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I even think there's a benefit to coaching both on the female side and the men's side, which I've had the pleasure of doing over the years. I was able to coach our women's team 2 years ago, and I was able to coach high school girls soccer and even club soccer. So it's kind of big, well-rounded experience with all that.
Yeah, wow. Because I guess you're really coming from the standpoint of, like, the sport is the same, but the individuals that are competing have different different lead dominoes and different skills and different ideas about where they want to take it and all things like that, right? So you're working with both, whether it's men, women, or different age groups. It's just going to challenge you and make you a better coach, right?
Yeah, it was fun. Like, I can't, like, put my finger on for me, the game is the game, and
right.
I taught the game the same way, whether it was female, male, it doesn't matter to me. It was the biggest difference is, after the game, the girls had specifically they wanted to eat at this place, and this is all they would. The guys, listen, we're stopping here, and you're going to get a Big Mac. And
right.
They're too nervous to say anything to me, so I said, okay.
Sure.
But no, it's funny. But both experiences are really good.
That's great. That's great. Now, real quick, you threw it into your background before. How did you get the opportunity to coach with Chico, was it? The men's national player?
Oh,
how'd you get that opportunity at a young age?
Connecticut is a pretty good soccer place. It's kind of like, I know Long Island is, and New York and New Jersey. Like, Connecticut has some really good coaches and good programs. So he was part of, at the time, like back in the late 80s, mid 80s to early 90s, Southern Connecticut State had some of the best players, some of the national championship winning teams in Division II, and he was kind of part of that whole scene with the Cranian and Ray Reed, who's the head coach of UConn right now. So South Central was the club that they all kind of coached at, and that was run out of the campus at Southern Connecticut State. So long story short is I was a player there. I played on the U18 South Central team, and then went to college, went to Central, and kind of just slotted into that as an assistant coach with them because I knew those guys when I was growing up.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. It comes back to the relationships that you build. And even when you're a young player, you don't realize that you are creating relationships. You just think you're playing soccer or, whatever sport.
Oh, yeah. It's such a small world, right? I always tell everybody this. I would tell my players, listen, you have no idea who knows who, and you don't know who's watching. So every single time, it could be a pickup game in the park.
Yeah.
You have to, if you want to excel, you have to do your best because eventually you're going to get noticed. And it's not just, hey, it's the state championship game. Now I got to play good. It's every single time you touch the ball.
Sure. Yeah, and you're just creating opportunities without even realizing it because 4 or 5 years down the road, you'll get a phone call and be like, oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So as you're keeping busy in all your coaching and things, like what is something that you do, to prepare, let's say for a team practice or, team training session? Do you do anything specific that you know of?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it depends. I could take an example like the college team now. So I kind of have a thing where I update and I take a look at how did last season go, how did every training session go, and John Wooden, the basketball coach, everybody knows John Wooden from UCLA. He would take notes on each training and say, how did this exercise work? How could he make it better? And he'd write it down back in the day on little note cards. And I do the same. I go back and I take notes on what I did, what worked, what didn't work, how can I make it better? And then I remove, we have basically a game model, right? And I have the luxury of recruiting players to fit the way that I want to make the team.
Okay.
So our team is a team that keeps the ball, and I value, really intelligent players who are technically sound and so forth. So we really like to keep the ball. And so I recruit those type of players, and they fit into the style of play that I coach.
Okay.
And pretty much every exercise that we do is in direct relation to how we're going to play the game. Now, there are adjustments that you'll make from week to week. So if the other team has, maybe a forward that is, electric pace, he's so fast we can't catch him. Well, now you might have to change your game model a little bit to take into account that one piece that could hurt you.
Sure.
And we're not going to like destroy the game model. We're going to keep it basically the same. We'll just make a few adjustments, and we'll practice that during the week,
right?
To get ready. And then for me personally, like it's we are a JUCO, so it's a 2-year school, different than a 4-year, in a sense that I do like to keep things fresh. And one of the things that I really believe in is diverse training environments. So.
Okay.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Like we do small area possession games every single day in training, because the reason we do the small area possession games is if you take a regular 11v11 game, and that's really broken down into 1v1, 2v2, 3v2, all these little games within the game.
Okay.
And players need to be able to find solutions to these little games within the game. And by playing in a small area, it could be whatever it is, 3v2,
sure.
5v6, whatever it is. They have to figure out ways to win, ways to keep the ball. And if there's little goals involved, or if there's a direction of play, they got to figure out how to be successful at that.
Okay.
And what happens is I constantly change those exercises every single day, and every exercise we keep adding variables. And we do it because...
So you mean you'll be doing like a small spaced game, but one day they might be able to shoot, the next day they might not be able to, like things like that? Like those variables?
More like the small space games are going to start off with us with just pretty much, it doesn't have to be a game like you're thinking, like 5v5, right? It could be, 4 guys on the outside, 1 guy in the middle, and then 3 defenders in the middle, and we're keeping the ball away from the 3 defenders.
Sure.
There might not be scoring, there might not be goal, there's no goalkeepers, there's no nothing.
Right.
But the long story short is that we want players to be able to figure out how to keep the ball under intense pressure, and with the defenders all over them. And then the next thing is that if you did the same thing every day, players would get bored, and they'd figure out a way to beat the game, and it would stop them from becoming better.
Sure.
They would stop having to find solutions. So by constantly changing the variables, the players are never comfortable. They'll call that unstable training environments. You'll hear the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby team, always say that. Unstable training environments where the players have to problem solve. And what actually happens is, I actually this morning, I was working on some of this morning, where in those unstable environments, it will lead not just to different tactical solutions to the kids, but actual development of unique technical skill sets as well. So you're not just, it's the brain and it's the body together coming up with solutions. And these things would not have been experienced by the player if you didn't have these unstable training environments. So that's a big part of the way I look at player development, because my specialty really is looking at player development, and I'm not saying I have the right way, but I like to look at it from a scientific view, and also just to give coaches ideas that they can kind of take and make their own and run with. And they don't necessarily have to change the way they coach, but hopefully they can work in some of the things, some of the ideas that I present to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're saying with the unstable training environment, like, if it's soccer, instead of like breaking it down and trying to teach a kid how to shoot a certain way, you're saying with that particular philosophy, it'll create an opportunity where the kid's got to figure it out, right? And then
Yeah.
maybe he teaches him or herself that shot just because it presented itself in more of a competitive situation.
100%. That,
Wow.
in a lacrosse context, what I
Yeah.
would say is, say you want a person to maybe learn how to follow through when they're shooting the ball with a lacrosse stick, and maybe you have a female lacrosse player, and instead you make them use a longer male lacrosse stick,
Sure.
and that's gonna alter the way that person actually can shoot the ball. That's a constraint. So now you don't even have to tell that player. That player now has to figure it out. Oh, how am I now going to adjust my technique to use this male lacrosse stick?
Right.
And, if you're going to talk about basketball, you would say, you're going to work on a jump shot, right? But the reality is, and this is the way I look at technical skills, a jump shot, all I could do, first of all, as a coach, is maybe give you some fundamentals. And you got to practice that jump shot. But the reality is, there's only so many ways that you're going to practice that jump shot by just taking, rote training, isolated technical training. Here you go. You're taking the same jump shot over and over again. There's no element of adaptation. And it becomes predictable. So instead, maybe you put something up like you see in the gym. They have these nets that you have to shoot over the net to get that ball to go into the basket.
Sure.
So now you've used a barrier. And now when that kid's playing the game, they have to take jump shots in a game situation over that barrier. And now they're learning, 100 different ways to take that jump shot. And what happens is that what coaches sometimes don't realize, and you see this all the time at the younger levels, when you have a coach, especially a coach who's not used to coaching at the younger levels, the explanation that you give as a coach cognitively, it could be a good explanation, but there's only so much you can explain. Right. That person, that'll never substitute that kid having to shoot over a barrier in a game-like related exercise. Nothing you can say can emulate that experience. So that's why I say, the exercise itself has to become the teacher if you're smart enough to develop the right exercise.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these things could even be applied to supplemental training. And it's a little bit harder, but you can still do it. So, supplemental training, when I say maybe just a coach working with one player, right? Okay. Maybe we're working on finishing, and often you see, the coach just plays the kid the ball and he shoots it into the corner.
Yep.
Oh, maybe we can limit that space so they can only, touch the ball within 2 feet, and then they have to shoot in between two mannequins, and maybe they have to shoot over a certain obstacle. Their technique is going to have to adapt.
Sure.
So kind of and then when you're done with all that stuff, though, you still have to have the player perform those techniques, strip all that stuff away, take all the cones away, take all the mannequins away.
Yep.
They still have to be comfortable with their own space and time on that field and produce.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think, as a coach, when you're doing things like that, based on some of the things you're talking about, I've seen when you challenge kids, most kids are open to it. Like most kids they do want to get better, and they do want to get challenged, and they don't want to get stale. And I feel like it's it's a job of that trainer or coach to really allow them to make mistakes in the short term. I'm putting you through a tough little, I'm going to constrain your time, your space, put some obstacles like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But then how many coaches do that and then kind of almost get on the kid about screwing up? It's no, I want you to. I'm kind of setting you up for it. And that way, that really connects what you're talking about, right? The technique and then the, the brain really processing game-like practical solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, this whole thing is really interesting to me because, if your basic technique is really poor, you do need to correct the basic technique.
Sure.
There's not much you're going to accomplish but once you get that basic technique, now it's time to put this to use where you have to adapt it and you have to put the strategic part to it. And that is, that's where a lot of this creativity from the coach is going to come into play.
Yeah.
And it's that stuff is very, very, very important.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just real quick, something you said before about your note cards. That's interesting. Do you write on those note cards, like on the field, or like in your office right after practice, or while you watch the film?
Yeah, it's funny. So it depends what I have on me. So I'll write it down, and I'm not necessarily going to write it straight on paper if I don't have it.
Yeah.
But I'm either going to put it into my cell phone, I'm going to put it into my iPad, whatever I need to do.
Right.
And then eventually I'll translate that and get that into use and into updating. So I have I plan out the season, the preseason, everything. So I have everything down. I have my own graphics program and stuff that I use. So every exercise I do, I have a graphic for it, and I have an explanation, and I have key points. I'll go back in my master files and continue to update. Like I spent 5 hours this morning updating content, and it's a part of the job, right? And you always have to, because my viewpoints are always being altered just a little bit too. So I'm always going back and kind of changing the way I looked at things as over time, as I have time to reflect and some more stuff comes my way that I can, rethink.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And then how do you use a specific system for actually evaluating those drills and exercises, like you were saying? Like if it's good, if it's not, how can we change it? Like what cues are you using to make those decisions?
Yeah. It's funny, again, the best thing that I can do is actually take part in these exercises sometime. You're not going to see me every day taking part in practice.
Sure.
That's not going to happen. But in the off season, I'm going to take part in a lot of the training sessions because I want to experience what the players experience. And that actually helps me evaluate how it was.
Okay.
And I will find that, and I'll ask players after I remember this past spring I did and 16 versus 3, right? And it sounds crazy, but it's in a very small 10 by 10 area and it uses 2 soccer balls. And I wanted to get the feedback and the feedback, as long as the kids are honest and not trying to yeah, coach, it was great, let's play a game now.
Yeah,
as
right.
long as they're honest with the feedback, then that helps me out as well. But obviously through observation, you can kind of figure things out, what the value is. And if
Sure.
it's going to break down, and if I notice that, if I notice a flaw, and the real thing is about flaws. Like, if it becomes too easy, if the kids figure out a strategy and the other team can't stop it because
Sure.
there's a flaw in it, I got to change it. And that's kind of the things I look at.
Interesting, yeah.
With all the exercises.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
The other thing one of the things that we do, and it's, again, because the college season is so short, I want players playing different positions all the time. Like to get, especially in the off season, because what I want them to understand, hey, this is, if I'm a center mid, this is actually how it feels to be the striker, the winger, the center back, the right back, because they ultimately have to coordinate and play with all those guys.
Right.
So I want them to have a well-rounded idea of all the positions. I think it makes them a smarter player. And in soccer, we can get into it. I don't know if lacrosse is the same, but the guys who play in the center of the field are the ones that you have to have a really good IQ to play in the center. And I often think this is why at younger levels, I hate to see specific positioning, I'm a right back and I'm 8 years old. Nah, it's too young. Go play center mid, go play striker, go play winger. Let's figure it out and get a better experience.
Yeah, there are a lot of coaches at the lacrosse youth levels that rotate positions and make kids play, because lacrosse does have, I guess, more boundaries than soccer. Like if you're a defenseman, you can't cross the midfield line at certain times, and the same for attackmen and things like that. So, yeah, if you're an attackman, a lot of times coach will be like, no, you're going to play offense, and then you'll get your defense when you're a midfielder, I always feel like that is the way to go. And a lot of parents later on, when it comes to high school and things, they're like, oh, would it have helped Johnny if he played defense as a kid, and I'd be like, well, yeah, it would certainly help. I'm like, but
Yeah.
and now at your age, like just move past it. Like you don't need to get that experience now when you're trying to get recruited and really, tone things up. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
it would help you, but at this point, it's not going to hurt you not doing it,
Yeah.
you know. But
It's funny because like through the developmental phases, like if you have a center back in say in college, right, and that might be equivalent to a center defender or something in lacrosse. Um, you wouldn't see that kid doing one-on-one moves trying to beat people and score. But the reality is, if that player had learned those, which they probably did when they were younger,
right,
at least they'll be able to recognize them coming at them from the strikers. Oh, this kid's pulling this move. This kid is going to cut to his right because they already train those. That's why it's good to be well-rounded because if you
right,
it gives you a little advantage in predictive information.
yeah, yeah. Now, does that influence like your recruiting, your evaluations of some of the kids?
So, I mean, it's nice to get players who are a little bit well-rounded, and the reason being is, you never know about injuries. It depends on the depth. If your depth of your squad is not that great, can my winger play an attacking center mid? Can my winger play right back? Can my center back play defensive center mid? Like those are things that are very, very important to have that. And I tell you what, I mean, there's kids who I recruited like straight out winger striker. They get to me, you're a center back. You're playing center back, and this is the way we're going to transform you. And that's fine too, because some kids, I'm sure you see this all the time in lacrosse. They could be the star of their high school team, and maybe the teams they're playing aren't so good, and maybe they needed him to score all the goals or her to score all the goals, but put him on a college team.
Yep.
Now maybe that kid is your best defender.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that happens a lot in lacrosse. Kids will be recruited to play and then their position is changed in college. And like from a coach's perspective, you're doing it because it's going to help the team. But like those skills depending on where you are in the field, a lot of them are interchangeable. So like your offense here is going to help you become a better clearing defenseman or clearing D-midi, things like that.
So these things come down to to how you train your team as well. Like in the developmental stages, like when you're training the kids, are you training players to be complete players? Or is your training lacking?
Sure.
And that's why I like, most of my trainings are going to be game-based trainings where really the priority is on decisions. How many meaningful decisions does each player have to make at each training session? Because if they're not making meaningful decisions and if they're not forced to problem solve on their own and figure things out, for me, that's what it's about. I mean, you can see players who are used to coaches who are screaming on the sidelines, do this, they're joysticking the whole game.
Sure.
And sometimes you put those kids on your team and you don't say anything, and they're paralyzed because they're so used to the coach talking them through the game, telling them where to be at all times.
Right.
They're used to just, freedom.
Yeah.
And these are very, very important things for me as a coach. I will say a few things here and there. Like if I notice somebody's out of position, I'll say, hey, whatever, check your shoulder, tuck in, get with the back line, whatever.
Sure.
Not many times you're going to hear me say that. And the reality is that, these guys in a soccer game, because it's fluid, and I would assume lacrosse is much the same.
Yep.
We'll make adjustments at halftime. And we might have one or two, hey, if we go up a goal, if we go down a goal, here's probably what we're going to do,
right.
da-da-da. And we'll have practiced these things in training. But the reality is this is a thinking game. Players have to be able to think and problem solve for themselves because the coach at this point is not going to do that from the sideline too much.
Right. And even if you are the smartest coach in the world, for a kid under pressure, like on game day, to take what you're saying, if it's new, like you said, you've practiced it, you've trained it. So on game day, it's a lot easier to be exposed. But if all of a sudden you feel like, you're the smart coach and you got to jump in and tell them something new, it's like more times than not, that's not even going to work anyway, even if it is the right answer. Just because the kids have never done it, they don't have the habits. and it's going to make them think in a bad way and hesitate.
And again, we're talking about the coach saying something and that actually translating to the kid in real time in the game.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Now, it could happen if you say, hey, Johnny, tuck in 10 yards to the right. Okay, now you made a change. But, that's about it.
Right.
And, those. It's funny, I remember seeing some scouting reports, and literally the scouting report is 20 pages long. Number 11 cuts into his right. You have to, And I'm like, dude, no one is ever going to remember that. They're just not going to remember that.
Sure.
And you can't. That's why I think I laugh sometimes, because I actually think that coaches have to give up control first. You have to realize that you could drill your guys forever. You could give them a 30-page scouting report.
Yep.
You're not going to. It might make you feel better, but it's not going to change the outcome of the game. Because I honestly think I try to keep it to a couple key points. Here's the key points. Go out and execute. But my message to them on game day is be excited, have fun, and enjoy yourself. Yeah. Don't worry about me screaming at you. Don't worry about it, because that's the time. The game is the reward. If you've trained correctly, then whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You can't control a result, and these are interesting discussions about motivation, because motivation means it does mean something for sure. I mean, being motivated means something, but the reality is you have to be focused and able to execute. That's what this comes down to. You could be motivated as hell and still lose 8-0.
Sure, right.
That's so I try to stay away from that kind of stuff. And it's these things in coaching though can be a little different on game. A 1-game situation is different than the best of 10.
Correct.
And the best of 10, the best team's going to win. 1-game situation, you do have to be a little smarter.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And based on the philosophies about the scouting report and things like that you're talking about, did you feel did you have those ideas as an athlete, as a player, or is it just kind of something that you've just adapted and kind of figured out as you went along?
So again, even as a coach now, like I'm saying, a lot of the coaching courses are going to teach, hey, you have to know what the principles of play are in attack, in defending, and for a player, do I really care about the principles of play? Do I care about the principles of play and defending? I don't even know what the principles of play are. I got to be honest, for when I was a player.
Right.
But what I do know is I did know how to break down space. I could see, I see there's a gap between the center back and the left back, whatever. I'm going to hit that ball to the winger, and we're going to be in on goal.
Sure.
That's all I care about. That's all I knew. And so for me as a coach, when I'm constructing my training sessions, the kids don't have to know any of that. They really don't.
Okay.
All they need to do is follow the training session. And if I want them to find penetrating balls on the ground, I simply put in the rule, no ball can be played over the knee. Okay, so now when you have possession of the ball, you can't even switch the field in the air. So I'm getting the outcome I want without the kids even being aware of what we're doing.
Right.
And for me, that's very important, because now they're forced to explore different solutions to break down the other team, and that solution is going to be through balls on the ground without them even knowing. So I'm giving them an opportunity to explore, that type of a skill set, and
right.
That's really, really important to me. And now, I guess the thing, so there's a debate on this, though. When you talk about constraint-based training, the debate is, say, hey, I want my team to be better at possession. So before you can score, you need to take 5 passes.
Okay.
Well, you're going to get the argument that, well, what if on the 3rd pass the kid had a shot on goal or had a killer through pass and we could have scored?
Right.
You're not actually teaching that kid game intelligence. I would probably argue a little bit with that point, because at that point, that team is teaching. You're teaching that team how to keep the ball. After those 5 passes, they can hit those killer passes. But
sure.
And it's the same if the other team only has 7 seconds to score. Now it's different. I think all those different situations are really important, and the reason is that absolute freedom for me in training all the time
Yep.
is not a good thing. So, we had spoke about that, and and that's why I think, creating these constraints in these unstable training environments are so good, because if all the kid has is absolute freedom, they'll revert back to solving and playing the game the same way they've always done it.
Correct.
And they'll never look for new solutions, and their game is probably not going to improve.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's funny that you bring that up, because like on the surface, I would argue that freedom's better, right? But I also think when you're talking about those constraints, I would think a lot of coaches fall into the trap of like just using one constraint, and every drill they do has a set number of passes, versus what you're saying, like, no, you got to do it all. You do touches, you do time, you do space, constrain it all in different drills and exercises, and that's how the whole thing works, right?
Oh yeah, and no, don't get me wrong. There is a time for complete freedom,
Yeah.
but they have to experience the other stuff
No,
too.
yeah, I'm with you.
It's just complete freedom. It's no good. Even simple passing exercises, right? I mean, it's great to mix up the tempo. You have to mix up the tempo
Sure.
in those, and it's also great. You have to put some stress into that training environment. Not cortisol, bad stress, but good stress.
Yep.
So maybe that same passing pattern, you're now competing against five other groups, and whoever completes that pattern 6 times is the winner. Ooh, now that adds a twist. Now it's not that same passing pattern. It's under pressure, and they have to perform. And I like things like that as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely does. And there's like in lacrosse, there's a unique aspect of lacrosse where you can spend hours working on your stick, your right hand, your left hand, throwing it off the wall, shooting. But like what you're saying, you get into a game, the other team is allowed to hit you hard to stop you from shooting. So it's like you need the foundation. You certainly do, 100%. But you also need to figure out either how to take a hit, or what happens after I get hit, or mentally, reactively avoid those hits so your hands are free.
Yeah.
It's not like golf where you're competing against yourself or the course. It's like, no, these guys are coming after you, and they're allowed to use a 6-foot metal stick to stop you.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's hard. That is a tough game.
Right.
So, I mean, much different than golf. What I would say is that, it's, for me in soccer, how you avoid some of that is by saving seconds on the ball. So if you have, it starts when you don't have the ball. It starts by scanning, getting a good picture of where you are in the field in relation to your teammates and the other players.
Okay.
Top players can get a total picture. How many people are on a lacrosse field?
You're playing, it's 9 plus a goalie, so you're playing 10 on 10.
So basically, the entire picture is that player plus 19 other players.
Correct. Yep.
That player has to have a fluid and flexible way to process all that information into one in-the-moment, real-time, what researchers would call a flock. It's called a play in sports.
Okay.
So that person has to always know where they are, and they can see basically all the moving parts, how that makes one picture of the play.
Right.
And then at that point, they need to be able to focus on specific parts of the play that are important for them without losing focus of where all the other moving pieces are. So what I would say is this. I mean, that takes a fluid intelligence level that for sports that's developed over years. So you have to figure out, get yourself in space. So when you receive that ball, your body position has to be the correct body position to receive the ball. All these types of things, you have to have the correct technique, will save you time on the ball. So maybe if your hips are facing the guy that's throwing you the ball, maybe it will take you too long to pivot and rotate to get to the ball, to the other side of the field, compared to if you receive it on the half turn and throw it to the other. I don't know how.
Sure. Right. No. Yeah. No. I get it. Yeah. 100%.
But And what people don't understand, like I'll give you the stat for like in the 2000, I think it was 2006 World Cup, the average Germany came in I think third place. The average time on the ball was 2.9 seconds per player. When they won the World Cup in 2014, the average time on the ball was 0.9 seconds. They reduced it by 2 seconds per possession per player. And all that, for me, I don't know. The Germans probably like to take, credit for that, but I'll give Pep Guardiola credit for that, because he had most of those players from Bayern Munich he trained and were on that World Cup team. But I'm sure I'll get a lot of flack for that. But the reality is that's why Barcelona was so good. It's figuring out ways to save time on the ball, because then the defenders can't get close enough to you. And those are things that the novice person will not even recognize. They'll just say, "Oh yeah, that team does really well. They move the ball great."
Right.
But there's much more to it than that.
Yeah. No, they see the outcomes of the results and then kind of flock towards that. Yeah. But
yes.
Don't necessarily know what it means or why it's happening. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I like that. Yeah, so like back to your lacrosse analogy, there's a lot of, if you're looking at it based on results, there's a lot of things you can do and still catch a ball, right? But if you're looking at it like, well, I need to catch this ball, but be in a position to extend the play as early as I can. I think that's kind of towards what you're saying about time on ball.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's like, well, yeah, this is your technique right now. And yes, you are catching the ball. You're doing a really good job of catching. But now you're off balance and your stick is 5 feet away from your body. Like throw a defenseman in there who's sliding to you. Like you're giving him all this time and space and all this real estate to distract you with. Like this. And then doing it like this will allow you to catch it and extend the play with as little distraction as possible.
And the reality is the top players are able to make it look so simple.
Yep.
It's not overly complicated.
Right.
And a lot of the novices will think that this is about technical, like trickery, or this is,
Right.
But the reality is that the better the player, the simpler it looks.
100%.
That's just the way it goes.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I think it goes
in
back
all
to your
types
point.
of things.
I think it goes back to your point of all your constraints and the exercises and allowing the kids to figure it out. Right?
Yeah, and when you look at neuroscience, it says if you give a person even a fraction of a second more time, their ability to make a decision is enhanced greatly. So in sports, your body position, receiving the ball, getting into space, gives you that extra fraction of a second.
Yep.
You're going to make a better pass. You're going to score more goals. You're going to, players who scan the field more with more head movement have, complete 2/3 more passes and score more goals than players who with less head movement. These are, those are very important things.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's all good stuff, and like you said, the better athletes are doing it more efficiently or just looks more fluid because they've been doing it longer, and it's tougher to really understand why they're doing it or what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's
100%. And again, those things we're talking about, those are tactical. That's intelligence. That's IQ.
Yeah.
Those things that you cannot practice those things by yourself.
Right.
That's why it's so important to have, a coach and a team and a great training environment. You could practice your technique all you want.
Yep.
And those things are good. And so what you're saying is you can spend time with both hands, lacrosse stick, ball, nonstop.
Right.
There is a benefit to that, without a doubt. But the reality is,
but it's a piece of the puzzle.
It's a piece of the puzzle.
Correct.
Yep. It's a piece of the puzzle. Like I'll never say that the more comfortable with the ball or with the stick or whatever you are, that's only good things come from that. That's never going to deter your game.
Right.
That's good.
Right. And like lacrosse right now during the quarantine, there's a lot of stick tricks and trick shots and things like that, and there's a lot of people who are against it, saying as far as development goes, like it's not important, which I can definitely see that argument, but just in the big picture, it's like, well, if the stick's in the kid's hands and they're getting comfortable, yes, could they be doing something probably a little more practical and game-like? Yeah. But at the very least, they're getting very comfortable with the stick in their hands. you know. So
anytime that's in their hands, it's better than watching TV and playing video games.
100%.
And the reality is, if that's going to develop love for the game, awesome.
Absolutely.
Then let them do all the tricks that they want. And and to be fair, like you and I are probably a little bit more, you know, maybe more old school. Like some of the tricks that the kids do now in soccer, I've never even seen half of these things before. And they're really, really cool.
Right.
But the reality is that, do I think that some of those tricks could be worked into the game? I think without a doubt.
Yeah.
But the hard part is, though, like, you know, again, when we talk about the best players, simplicity is always key.
Correct.
So to be able and do these wonderful, you know, things, it can happen, but you can also lose the ball.
Right, because you're probably going to be holding on to the ball too long.
You down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you got to, but this is how innovation happens. That's why I'll never say, hey, no, don't do that.
Correct.
It's just because I hate to say to somebody to don't do that. And even if like practicing some of those tricks makes you maybe adapt a technique that's maybe a little more useful, there you go. Then the end result was, you know, a positive.
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So listen, man, let's wrap this up. It was an awesome conversation. I mean, you and I could talk for hours. I love the way your mind works. I love the way you look at sports and teaching and learning and all that good stuff. So I really appreciate your time. Is there anywhere people can learn more about you, track your progress?
So first of all, thanks so much for having me. And I always think that, you know, this is great. Like it's a lacrosse podcast, but I think that all sports can learn from each other. And you know, I could, again, we're done with the conversation, but we can go on forever about how this has influenced other sports.
Yep.
But if I have a cognitive soccer course at DiBernardoSoccerSchool.com, and I have a senior diploma and youth diploma course on there as well. And that's really what I put out as far as coaching education. But I also have a blog, CoachDiBernardo.com, and I have a YouTube station that's under my name. And there's probably 500 plus videos of some of my training sessions on there. So, you know, that's how people can find me on Instagram as well. And, you know, I'm pretty active on social media, so I'm happy to answer people's questions. It's just sometimes it takes me a little bit of time to get back.
Sure. No, that's great. That's great. I'll be checking that stuff out for sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, likewise. Thank you. You've been listening to the Lead Domino podcast powered by MDP. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Reach out. We'd love to chat and learn more about you and how we can help. Visit us at mdplacrosse.com and follow us on Instagram at MDP Lacrosse Training and at Lead Domino Media. Until next time, respect, inspire, and support yourselves and each other.